Hmm, I wonder where Hino is. I could have sworn she told me to meet her here after school.
Oh, oh, I'm sorry.
Hey, Hino, you are finally here. You are not Hino.
No, I'm not. Hey, you're a student from this school, right? Can you help me? I'm looking for my friend from middle school.
Sure, I can help you. What is your friend's name?
Her name's Sakura.
Sakura? Hmm, Sakura. That name does not ring a bell. Hmm, have I heard it somewhere?
Hey, Nagagafujifuji, sorry I'm late. Wait, who's this?
Oh, hello, Hino. This girl is looking for someone called Sakura. Do you know her?
I get the feeling that I heard this name somewhere. But it's time for this week's episode.
Ah, I forgot. That is why we were supposed to meet for this week's episode.
Hey, you! Wanna join us?
Sure? What is it about?
It is about our friend Adachi during her last year in middle school, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But what about the friend I'm looking for?
Do not worry about it. I am sure you will get to see her sooner than you think.
Yeah, maybe she's in the library. But that can wait. It's time to add a Shima and chill.
Chapter 1. Sakura and Spring. It was true, what everyone said. Sakura's face did seem sculpted out of ice. Her uninterested eyes were like mirrors, reflecting only what was before her and nothing else. It was the spring of our third year in middle school. The classes had been reshuffled as we moved grades like they always were, and still lacking in self-assertion. I'd found myself assigned to be a library assistant. Well, the role was technically co-organizer of cultural events, but as those were rare and I would, for the most part, just be performing library duty, I felt that the former name was more appropriate. Speaking of which, it soon came time for my first day of working there. I sat behind the counter, and next to me sat Sakura. To tell you the truth, I was quite nervous. I'd been in the same class as her during our first year as well, but we'd never talked. Still, even just looking at her from a distance, I was able to tell what sort of person she was. She showed no signs of friendliness, always acted cold, and barely ever talked. In addition, her face was also very pretty. Her skin seemed almost transparent. It was for that reason that people sometimes said her to be a statue made of ice. Staring at her now, I could see where they were coming from. Still, even if admiring her face was enjoyable, it wasn't the case that I could keep doing so forever. Taking a deep breath, I braced myself.
Hey, um,
I spoke softly to her to get her attention. Sakura's eyes had been fuzzy, as if possessing no outlines, but now they grew firm.
Mm, what?
She waited a while before turning her silky, uninterested eyes my way. In that instant, Everything that was happening around us stopped mattering to me. I felt it to be truly important that Sakura had chosen to participate in library duty with me. I wonder if she will come next time as well. Perhaps. Then again, it was lunch break right now. I had a strong suspicion that, had this been after school, she would have been nowhere to be seen.
No, it's just the card.
All this had happened with another student standing before us, clearly here to borrow books. Waiting it out hadn't been effective, and I'd eventually been forced to notify her directly. Yes, that was the reason why I had spoken to her.
Oh, right.
At last, Sakura moved. It seemed that she hadn't noticed the girl, which was strange considering that she had been facing forward the whole time. Not particularly flustered, she began processing the library card. There was a look on the girl's face that indicated that she wanted to say something, likely a comment on the long wait she'd been made to endure, but as Sakura wouldn't give her any attention, she was left simply to fold her arms, not sure how to go about complaining to someone who wasn't listening. Soon enough, Sakura was down and presented the card to the girl, then gradually slouched forward and wrote her name along with her date of birth on it. Staring at her head, Sakura muttered the following.
Sorry for the wait.
Initially, even the girl herself appeared unsure as to what had just been said to her. She eventually lifted her head, but by that time, Sakura had long since averted her eyes. All she could do was reply with a vague, "Sure, okay." I too was left speechless by her apology. I'd always imagined her as someone who didn't care in the slightest how her actions affect others, and yet here she was acting so meek. I was genuinely confused. Then again, once the incident was over, Sakura fell right back into a state of daydreaming, giving off the impression that she didn't feel remorse and wasn't going to be changing her habits after all. Likewise, I turned my eyes back towards her face and continued where I had left off. Sakura's posture was similar to how she usually sat in the classroom. She never talked to anyone, nor was she ever accompanied by another person. No, it was always just her, just Sakura. She didn't seem lonely, however, but rather independent, as if she had no need for others. The proof for this could be seen in the behavior of the people around her. No one ever harassed her. Why? Well, because if you were trying to pick on her, she was sure to remain cool-headed and lash back. That was the impression I got of her, and I was sure that everyone else did as well. I was no different from the people who avoided her for that very reason. And yet, staring at her from not all that far away like I was doing at the moment, I found it difficult to avert my eyes. It wasn't often that you got an opportunity to view the unapproachable this close up. Yes, I was satisfied with just looking. Sakura drew a lot of attention. Even the boys were interested in her. Despite that, no one ever attempted to touch her. After all, eyes by its nature was cold, sharp, and most importantly, fragile. As it turned out, Sakura hadn't shown up for library duty the second time around. The shift assigned to us took place after school, meaning that my prediction had been correct. Being right brought me no joy, however. I sat there on the chair behind the counter, trying to figure out what to do next. Should I remain where I was? Or maybe get up and look for her? Will I even be able to do that, or has she already gone home? I wiggled my hips around, uncertain, but ultimately decided that my best bet would be to try and find her. After all, Even if she was planning on leaving, there was a chance that I might catch her by the shoe rack if I hurried. I got up, and in order to minimize the time the counter will be left unoccupied, exited the library at full sprint. I was then met with a flight of stairs, which I proceeded to practically jump down. When was the last time I run this fast? I could have been during the winter at the very least. That I knew for certain. I never felt like moving around when it was cold. Spring, however, that was a different story. I soon reached the school's entrance. Sure enough, Sakura was there. Currently in the process of taking her shoes out of the shoe rack, she turned to look at me as I rushed towards her direction. Then, immediately afterwards, she turned her head back as if assuming that she couldn't have been the person I had business with.
Hey, wait!
I said to her while closing the distance between us. To tell you the truth, my heart was pounding slightly faster than normal. Once again, Sakura turned to face me. This time, however, there was an annoyed look on her face, indicating she'd now accepted that I did, in fact, have business with her after all.
Um, I came to say we have library duty today.
Oh, we do?
Apparently, she's merely forgotten. Sakura's eyes continued bouncing rapidly between me and the show rack. I nodded once as if to answer her question, which then prompted her to turn around and start walking outside.
Hey, come back here!
Shoving aside the slight bits of hesitation lingering in my mind, I went ahead and grabbed the sleeve of Sakura's school uniform. Though she didn't go as far as to shake me off, the look on her face as she turned around did make it clear that she was very much annoyed by what I'd done. At the same time, however, she seemed bored. There was no sliver of eagerness or motivation showing in her eyes and brows.
Isn't that something you can get done by yourself?
For something clearly meant as nothing more than an excuse for her to skip her duties, she sure had hit a sore spot. Yes, it was true that the lines in the library never got all that long, and a single person was undoubtedly more than capable of dealing with them. Just look at the previous instance. I'd done all the work while Sakura had mostly just sat there. That wasn't the problem. No, I was the one who I was worried about. Without Sakura there, my reasons for staying at the library suddenly seemed far weaker.
No, but again, we have library duty.
Unable to come up with anything clever, I went ahead and simply repeated myself. Still, it was a strong argument, one that even Sakura couldn't rebuke. She was forced to return her shoes to the rack, first apology a couple of days earlier, and now this. It seemed that Sakura did have a sensible side to her. The more I learned about her, the less like the image I had of her in my head, and more like a regular person she turned out to be. Sakura had now finished putting her indoor shoes back on, and as I walked beside her, I found myself staring at the hand I'd used to touch her earlier. Well, more accurately, her clothes. My fingers were not frozen, rather, they appeared completely normal. That was to say, faintly red. I brought Sakura back with me to the library. Not putting up any resistance, she sat down behind the counter where she proceeded to space out just like before. Every now and then, a yawn escaped her mouth, leaving me to wonder whether I should interpret them as a sign of tiredness or boredom. Never had I seen her grab a book off the shelf and start reading it, my go-to method for killing time. I wonder what sorts of thoughts went through her mind as she sat there silently. Something to the effect of Are we done yet? I will be extremely interested to find out. After all, there were many things around that I knew as little about as I did her.
Do you ever read books or stuff?
I went ahead and asked her, having built up just barely enough courage to do so. Her chin resting against her hand, Sakura opened her mouth and answered.
If there's a book that I like, then I read it.
I was left with the exact same number of questions as before. Thinking about it, it is unlikely hadn't been her goal to actually answer any of them. Had it?
If you'd like, I could introduce you to some books. I know a couple really interesting ones.
I squeezed out every last bit of courage I've had left, hoping that I would somehow be able to bring myself closer to her. And yet,
Huh? Oh, no, you don't need to.
Sakura replied while simultaneously waving me off. Then, as soon as those words were out of her mouth, she turned her head back. I found myself astonished. My intentions had been genuinely good, yet Sakura showed no warmth whatsoever towards them. That said, she didn't appear especially bothered by them either. Her behavior was just bland all around. Was she really not interested? Ironically enough, I grew quite interested as I wondered about that. Was there anything out there? Anything at all that would attract her attention? I took a quick glance at her face as I thought about that. Never had I imagined that being assigned to library duty would turn out to be such an exciting experience. I'd grab a book off the shelf, and though I was flipping through the pages, and though my eyes were scanning over the words, none of them would register in my brain. All of its processing power was currently being used to look for an excuse, something that I could use to spark a conversation between me and Sakura. Anything. And yet, there was nothing. The polished surface of ice that formed her face remained cold, allowing nothing to come near it. Seeing how she was unlikely to initiate any sort of interaction in a million years, the only choice I was left with was to make the first move myself.
Hey, Sakura, what do you um do on your days off?
Nothing really. Sleep, lie on my bed.
Weren't those two kind of the same thing? More importantly, was that really true? I didn't get the impression that she was trying to dodge the question or anything like that. So, maybe, as much as I appreciate Sakura not lying, this wasn't going to make for much of a conversation.
Well then, what sorts of grade do you get normally? Good?
Pretty average, I think.
Oh, I see.
I guess I should be grateful that she was even replying at all. Had she chosen to simply stare at me without a word, that would have been by far the most painful outcome. Then again, the situation I found myself in was also pretty high up there. This line of questioning wasn't getting me anywhere. It wasn't the right path to follow if I wanted to truly get a grasp of her. I needed to plunge deeper, even if that came at the risk of breaking the layer of ice that covered her. Or perhaps, would it only result in me slipping and tumbling over? I thought about it, racked my brain over it. And as I did, the world began fading away. The edges of my vision grew white. With my head hung, a single sentence left my mouth, like a shedding a massive teardrop.
Do you have any friends, Sakura?
It didn't take even a second for her to answer.
No.
An avalanche of pure white rushed over me. Really, I wasn't exaggerating. That was truly the level of force I felt. My fingers continued shivering as I pressed them tighter against the corners of the book I was holding.
I see.
Yep.
Well, in that case, my throat trembled. Uh, would you like to become friends with me? That was what I wanted to say. That was what I tried to say. And yet, the words just wouldn't come out. I had plenty of friends in school. That wasn't the issue. No, the difference was that all of those relationships had come to be natural. Never once had I walked up to someone and formally asked them to be my friend. It was for this reason that, in the heat of the moment, I found myself both embarrassed as well as scared. What if she said no? And then it ended up taking me a bit of time to overcome these feelings. Had I managed to be the first one to speak, things might have taken a turn differently. And yet, still facing directly forward, Sakura opened her mouth and spoke. It didn't feel like she was talking to me, but rather the void.
I don't mind that.
No cracks had appeared upon her icy surface. Not a single one. It remained as clear and smooth as ever. Cold and solid. Staring at her, the words that had been right on the verge of coming out were forced to retreat back into my throat.
I see.
Like hers, my reply was also aimed at no one in particular. She went on to ignore me, and this time, I was forced to give up. I stuck to simply observing her from then on. No longer did I attempt to spark conversations between us, and even when Sakura forgot about the library duty, I wouldn't go and get her. Those times she did show up, however, I'd spend the entire time staring at her face while pretending to read a book. I understood that was where the limit of what I was allowed to do to lay. A certain sensation crossed my mind each time I glanced at her lips. So pretty and faintly pink. I'd probably messed something up. That was how it felt to me. Those were the thoughts that continued to torment me. And yet, my interest towards her had yet to vanish. If anything, I found myself staring at her even more, tantalizing now that I had failed. The duties given to us changed as the second school term began, and with that, I lost the faint connection I'd had with Sakura. We still shared a classroom, sure, but it wasn't like I had any real excuses to go and talk to her. Plus, that would require her to be present, which was increasingly often not the case. It didn't seem that she was sick or anything, but rather just didn't want to come to school because she found it annoying. With nothing in between us, we ended up riding the flow that was our daily lives all the way to graduation. I was a bit worried that Sakura wouldn't show up there either, but she did. Still, she probably didn't remember me, didn't she? Watching her stand there with her head hung, I got the impression that she was quite bored. I continued staring at her from a distance. Although Sakura was placed in front of the line, every now and then she would shake her head from left to right. The principal's speech would eventually come to an end. Once it did, I wouldn't be able to chase after Sakura as she walked away from me. I usually hated having to listen to him speak. But now, on this one occasion alone, I found myself wishing that he would never stop. The ceremony was now over, and we were left to do what we wanted, whether that to be to form groups or just exit the sports hall straight up. Guided by a certain hunch, I left my circle of friends and rushed outside. There were sakura trees growing on either side of our school's central path. Looking at them, I could see that the color of their blossoms had begun to peek through. It wasn't quite spring yet, and we would have to wait a bit longer till full bloom, but it was eventually going to happen. Anyway, I glanced at the trees, at their faint and distant pinkish gleam, and saw the back of a familiar figure walking under them. The instant I saw her, my legs began moving. My shoulders shook. I started to run.
Sakura!
Calling her name, I closed the distance between us. Sakura slowly turned round. Spring might have been right around the corner, but the layer of ice surrounding her appeared sturdy nonetheless. Her eyes moved slightly, hinting that she did remember me after all, at least at some sort of level.
What?
She'd attempted to leave without a word, feeling not the slightest bit of reluctance to part ways with us. That was the Sakura I knew. That was the Sakura I always found myself staring at. I wonder, why did her cold attitude bring me so much joy?
Um, take care. Wait, no, that's not. Hmm.
What point was there to say something thoughtless? Something generic? I didn't want that to be how the final exchange between us went down. It felt like throwing something away. That sentiment grew, and before long, I found myself filled with courage. Courage gushing forth from somewhere deep within me. Was it desperation? Had my entire being turned over? Was I simply being proactive? Whatever the case, it inspired me. There was something I wanted to tell her. I knew it would be impossible to properly convey, but that didn't matter. I wanted to do it anyway. With that as my intention, I opened my mouth and
Thank you.
thanked her. Sakura's eyes grew narrow, almost as if asking me what I meant. It was simple. I was thanking her for allowing me to observe the person named Sakura with her guard down, as well as for the stimulation it had brought me. Then again, I could hardly imagine the dead serious way I had it said it striking a chord within her heart. Whatever. It wasn't necessarily for all the nuances to be transferred over. I didn't even want that. That was why I laughed. Though Sakura's expression did grow stiff for a moment, as if suspicious of me, she eventually replied,
Okay.
"Yes, it is okay," I said back. Not to her, however, but myself, silently. Then, without as much as a goodbye, Sakura turned around and left. Standing there, with all the sounds of the people behind me, I watched her leave. It didn't take long for the lump of ice that had been shot into my chest to begin melting. Strangely enough, what it did brought with it was warmth, spreading across my body, to my chest, and sides. Even if I were to spot Sakura in town in the future, I couldn't imagine us stopping to have a conversation. It was for that reason specifically, that I felt so thankful, like the petal of a flower fluttering in the wind. Her back grew distant from me. Not once, looking back, she melted into the sea of sakura blossoms, truly worthy of her name.
So, your given name is Sakura, huh? Adachi?
I asked her once the opening ceremony had come to an end, and we were walking outside together.
Yep.
It seemed like the perfect question to ask after looking up and seeing a sky full of sakura petals, but that was not what had happened here, and the conversation had instead been initiated by me glancing at the ground and seeing flowers scattered everywhere. I did kind of feel like something was missing. Speaking of the petals, I was sure that the way I was walking, doing my best to avoid stepping on any, looked really goofy from an outside perspective.
Hmm. Have I heard that before?
Probably.
Adachi nodded slightly. Where? On the second floor of the inn when we first met? I couldn't remember at all.
Hmm.
I nodded back while turning my eyes towards the sports hall standing in the distance. The floor there was cold, like frozen soil during the winter. Today, during the opening ceremony, it hadn't been quite as bad. Sunlight would continue to grow stronger, and with it, the comfort that place had once held would be restored. What was currently somewhere I couldn't wait to get away from would turn into a place of refuge. Sneaking a peek at Adachi's walking next to me, I couldn't help but wonder, would it fit never again is there? The look on her face made it hard for me to give a conclusive answer. Still, it hadn't even been a year since we met, huh? I found that a bit surprising. My relationship with Adachi truly was a mysterious thing. There were times when I could almost trick myself into believing that we had known each other forever, but equally often, it felt like we were complete strangers, and each day spent together might be our last. We didn't have a sturdy foundation to support us, which was likely where this instability arose. How did one go about building one of those? That I had no idea. Hmm.
Sakura.
I went ahead and called her by her first name just to tease her. Initially, she didn't react in any particular way, and her face remained generally expressionless. A couple of seconds later, however, having perhaps realized that it was her that I was addressing, she turned to look at me with her eyes wide open. Though a bit embarrassed, I did give her a smile back, which in turn caused Adachi's cheeks, ears, and even her fake neck muscles to grow the same color as the sakura blossoms around us.
Yeah, I might call you Sakura from now on.
I said, doubling down on teasing her. Adachi seemed visibly shaken by my comment, and I mean that literally. Her body trembled, and with it, the strands of hair on the sides of her head hopped up and down like the ears of an animal. She felt kinda adorable in a way. Anyhow, seeing how restless she appeared, I decided to stop there and resign myself to waiting for her to calm down, while continuing to walk forward. My eyes wouldn't point anywhere but straight forward till I heard the sound of her hair flapping stop. The sound did eventually stop, and when I turned around to glance at her, a sight that I couldn't help but grin at appeared in front of me. Adachi, smiling. There was a big, warm smile on her face, the kind that made it feel like she might start laughing out loud any second now. I found myself staring at this rare sight, fascinated by there being such an expression in Adachi's repertoire. It didn't take long for her to notice my gaze, however, and soon enough she flung her head up. Her face immediately became tense, and the pinkish tone of her cheeks grew more towards scarlet.
What?
She asked me while dexterously adjusting her bag, her eyes jumping all around. She still appeared relatively calm by her standards, though, and based on that, I could make the assumption that she wasn't aware of the kind of expression on her face. This was nothing compared to how she was reacting if I were to tell her. That I knew for a fact. I did wonder for a while if I should maybe tell her, but ultimately I decided to keep it to myself. Knowing how shy that she was when it came to these things, I had a feeling she might get super embarrassed and run off somewhere, and I really wasn't in the mood for having to chase her right now.
It's nothing. I was just looking at you, Adachi.
I said, though it didn't tell the whole story, it also technically wasn't a lie. Anyhow, Adachi seemed quite taken aback by my statement, and immediately afterwards, her eyes began jumping all around. Why?
Oh, I see. You were looking at me.
This time, it was the corners of her mouth that grew stiff. It almost seemed like she was trying to force herself to smile but failing horribly, both her eyes and mouth instead assuming the shape of a cut up apple. I wonder, did the muscles in her face ever get tired from all the moving around they had to endure? We exited through the school gate, and soon enough, I found myself walking by the neighborhood with her. There, I noticed that something was off, like sensing someone touching the back of my head. I immediately realized what it was: Adachi. It was weird for Adachi to be walking beside me.
Why are you following me, Adachi?
I asked her, prompting her to instantly freeze in her tracks. She then turned her helpless eyes, open wide as she'd been injured, towards me. It almost looked like she was clinging for me to help, and as a result, I ended up getting a bit flustered myself.
Also, you didn't come riding your bike today?
It went without saying, but the place you'd leave your bike at was located within the school premises. Combined with the fact that she lived in the complete opposite direction than I did, I genuinely had no idea why she would choose to walk all the way here with me. Where on earth could she have been hidden?
Oh, I'm going over there.
As she said this, the muscles around Adachi's eyes and mouth relaxed, as if the invisible ties binding her face had come loose. Over there? Over where? I wasn't sure, but that didn't stop me from feeling relief. The expression that appeared on my face showed as much. The look on her face while we sat in the classroom had been completely blank, and I had wondered if she was maybe in a bad mood, but thankfully, that didn't appear to be the case. The sitting order had once again changed as we began our second year. It hadn't been chosen randomly this time, however, but rather alphabetically, meaning that I could see Adachi to the front left from where I sat. A new year also meant new classmates, and while I myself had casually talked with some of them, Adachi, on the other hand, didn't seem to have exchanged words with anyone. Instead, she spent the entire time with her head hung, every now and then sneaking peeks at me, followed immediately by her averting her eyes. She appeared so stiff, so cold, almost as she was merely waiting for the day to come to an end. Then, when it did end, she walked straight to me. It was mannerisms like those that truly made her resemble my little sister. I felt relief seeing that she hadn't changed, but at the same time slightly worried. Though there was no denying that it was at least a bit weird for a high school student to act like an older sister towards someone from their own grade. Before I know it, that was how I ended up seeing things. I wonder, would Adachi be able to do well in a new class? Then again, it wasn't like the previous year had been all that great for her either, and so I wasn't sure how much I could reasonably expect. That was just the kind of girl she was, I felt. Still, there were also times when she dropped her guard around me and grew quite expressive. It almost seemed like Adachi was emotionally attached to me, and not just slightly.
Shimamura?
You sure look like a dog at times, Adachi.
I point out, I naturally meant to say a spirited dog, but ultimately decided to leave that part out.
No, I disagree.
She said back, all the while rubbing her nose and cheeks. Did she dislike dogs, perhaps? Personally, I quite like them, dogs and such. Anyhow, wasn't it about time that she turned back? If she just kept walking, she'd eventually wind up at my house. I would have pointed that out of her had I found another opportunity to speak, but since I didn't, we instead ended up walking side by side down the road painted in the color of spring, where the sakura blossoms scattered everywhere. With the warmth of the sun hitting my back, I let off a long breath.
Bonus chapter Hino's House The Visitor Part 1. It was Friday, after school. She had just announced that she would be coming over to my house, which was the reason behind the look of open disgust on my face.
Huh?
Like I said, it is been 2 whole years since. Wait, no, 3. 3 days? What did I eat for dinner 3 days ago? Hmm.
Focus, Nagafuji. Everyone knows your memory sucks, so stop worrying about it and look at me. My attempts at communicating with her telepathically were of no use. She simply continued walking, and eventually I was forced to give up. And there you have it. It was in that fashion that Nagafuji wound up coming over to my house with me that day. As we stood there, staring at the building at the end of the long stone road past the residential area, she opened her mouth.
Your home really does look like a villa.
You think so?
I asked back, expressing slight doubt towards her evaluation. For me, a villa was a building more in the Western style. Sure, our home was quite the mansion, in the sense that we had lots of greenery, plenty of trees, and a large yard with turtles, who had shown up uninvited living here. But a villa? Which part of it? I asked Nagafuji that, and she immediately began listing things.
The road leading here is paved with stone. You have a pond in your yard. Oh, and the whole place is covered in the fragrance of trees.
Her nose moved as she proceeded to sniff up said fragrance. I found myself prompted to do the same. She'd been right. You could definitely smell nature. It wasn't all that surprising, considering the amount of greenery surrounding us, wholly uncharacteristic of the residential area. Our house was also quite Japanese. That was to say, somewhat old fashioned with ample trees around it. Though the exterior had been renovated plenty of times, the inner sections, those remained the same way they'd always been. My grandparents also lived here. They were pretty traditional folk, which probably explained us having a room specifically for tea ceremonies. Sometimes I'd even get crammed in there without any say in the matter. Consequently, I wasn't a big fan.
Anyhow, your house sure is still huge.
It's pretty flat, but I guess so.
I opened the door to said flat mansion and was immediately met by the smiling face of a maid busy shining shoes.
Welcome home. I hope you had a nice day.
Yeah, whatever.
It was pretty embarrassing having to go through this with a classmate standing behind me, even if that classmate was Nagafuji. I felt like it made me seem detached from the real world, like some noble young lady or whatever. Though I wasn't able to say it directly, it was for this reason that I had always hated bringing friends over, even when I'd been little.
Sorry to bother!
Nagafuji stated loudly as she passed me and walked inside, making her presence very much felt in the process. Her giant breasts made their presence felt as well, as they pushed against my elbow. Nagafuji meat. No kidding. I wonder, where was it from? Did the difference between us arouse?
I guess. Oh, I see. A school friend.
A friend. Friend is enough.
I corrected her. There was no reason to get fancy with it. Plus, I didn't want her to treat Nagafuji the same way she did me, like some doll standing on a pedestal.
Just a moment, please. I will prepare tea for you right away.
No, it is fine. You do not have to.
It was Nagafuji who spoke.
I already bought some before I got here.
She continued, while pulling out a half-full plastic bottle of afternoon tea from her bag. It was what she had been sipping during lunch earlier that day. A wry smile appeared on the maid's face as she watched her shake the bottle of lukewarm liquid in front of her.
Don't mind her, that's just the kind of person she is.
I gave Nagafuji's bag a quick tap before entering the house myself, only to immediately lose my footing and slip. I'd failed to notice that the wooden floor in the hallway had been freshly polished. Then again, if my past experiences were any indication, it wasn't like noticing it would have made much of a difference. Anyhow, starting from the entrance, there were two major paths for you to pick from. You could walk straight forward to get inside the building proper, or take a right for an exterior pathway which offered a view on the entire yard. Going left was also technically an option, but the only thing there is a single room in which my grandmother resided. She was always joking about how much she loved the place and how much she wanted to see it inside. And with that, I had it right. Nagafuji followed after me, all the way ogling at the ceiling and walls with curious eyes. We continued walking. Before long, however, a face I hadn't seen in a while popped into my view.
Oh,
It was my fourth oldest brother, Yoshiro, having just exited his room. His eyes grew narrow as he noticed me.
Greetings, Akira.
Having moved out only 2 years prior, he was the brother who I'd had the most opportunity to interact with. Though we weren't on bad terms per se, I couldn't say that I was really fond of him either. He was the kind of person who would have done well to learn when to keep his mouth shut.
How rare to see you bring a friend along.
My brother sneered at me. He was wearing Japanese style clothes.
I didn't bring her. She followed me on her own.
Hello. Hey. Hi.
Nagafuji greeted him from behind me. Damn it. Just pick one and drop the others.
I am her older brother, Kushiro.
He said back, followed by a deep bow. Who was he trying to impress? Had he never met Nagafuji before or something?
Oh? Yes? Well, I am Nagafuji, of Nagafuji meat.
It was like she was trying to sound as pompous as possible with her reply, almost as if she viewed this as a competition of some kind. I really wish we wouldn't have. Still, her words lent a certain aura of politeness, thanks to her relatively intelligent appearance, even if the actual contents left something to be desired.
I hope you will continue guiding and encouraging Akira while like you have done so far.
Yes, sir. I will make sure to use the whip more liberally.
Uh,
Nagafuji's statement was obviously meant as a joke. Yoshiro's, on the other hand, almost certainly wasn't. He was the kind of person who took himself very seriously. Why was it that I needed to be offered guidance by someone from my own grade? Anyway, Goshiro then lifted his head, and with a somewhat serious expression on his face, told me the following.
By the way, we're having guests. Try not to make too much noise, please.
yeah, got it. Take care.
Randomly waving my hand, we parted ways with him. I wonder, how was it possible for personalities to be so different despite growing up under the same roof? He was so orderly, so proper. All of my brothers were. It was almost enough to make you wonder if they'd been raised stuffed inside a tiny box made of bamboo.
That person just now, he resembles you quite a bit, Hino.
What? No, I totally disagree.
For one, my brothers were tall. From the perspective of the young me, they'd appeared more akin to my father than what I'd imagined a brother to be. It was while we were walking down the pathway overlooking the yard that Geshu's words finally registered in my mind. Right, we did have guests. I just hoped I wouldn't get called later on to come greet them as well.
I see. So, that is how it was, huh?
Hearing the sound of Nagafuji pressing her hands together, I turned around to look.
What's what?
Your given name is Akira.
It seemed that I wasn't the only one who needed some time to process what my brother had said. I wonder, did it have to do with the way he spoke or something? Also, she had some nerve to forget that. I still remembered all those times she chased after me while shouting, Akira, Akira. I simply couldn't understand what was going on in that head of hers. Still, she did get good grades in school, so I guess there was that.
What are the names of your brothers again?
How was she ever going to remember those? Well, whatever. I suppose it wouldn't hurt telling her.
The oldest one is Kaichiro. The second oldest is Tokuchiro. The third oldest Matasaburo, and the one you saw just now, that was Goshiro.
It was really
It,
easy to remember them, with, with all following the same pattern. Likewise, I remembered hearing that the name I would have been given had I been born a boy was Daigoro. Oh, but don't get me wrong. It wasn't like my parents were disappointed that I was a girl. Nothing like that. Apparently, they had prepared a list of both boys and girls named before Kaichiro was born, and were delighted that the latter ones hadn't all gone to waste.
Hmm. Hmm.
Nagafuji nodded. Just one look at her face made it clear that, were I to demand her to repeat the name I'd listed back to me, she would be able to do so. Not in a million years.
Whatever. I only need to remember your name, Hino.
That's true, I suppose.
That was honestly pretty smart thinking for Nagafuji. It wasn't like she was ever going to run into them. Plus, more importantly, even if she did try remembering all of their name, she would have forgotten them in a couple of days anyway, and all that effort would have been for nothing. Still, she hadn't forgotten about me when I went overseas for a week, so that was good. Definitely. Having made our way through the hallways, I slid open the door at the end of it that led to my room. Nagafuji immediately removed her glasses as she stepped in. She then took off her bag and placed it on the desk alongside mine before lying down on the tatami. I was just about to ask her what she was doing when she began rolling sideways.
Having fun?
Yeah, I did not think that tatami would smell this good.
I could see her nose moving as she continued rolling.
Your room alone is bigger than our entire house.
Not really. You probably only have that impression because your house is so long and thin.
They had a second floor too, and a third. Being someone who loved high places, I was kinda envious of her. Still rolling on the floor, Nagafuji seemed to be really enjoying herself. That was how it appeared to me, at least. Personally, what I wanted to ask her was that didn't her breasts get caught when she did that? And a follow up, wasn't that really painful? It would have it wouldn't have been for me if I'd done it, in case you were curious, for reasons. Her rolling stopped as she hit the wall. Then, still lying on the tatami, she used her feet to kick herself back toward me, and before I knew it, she'd crawled between my legs like a caterpillar. I instinctively took a step back. She hadn't come to take a peek under my skirt, had she? It would hardly have been the first time she saw my underwear, but still, there was something about the context, her peeping at them, that I found slightly off-putting. Nagafuji looked up at me from the floor and tilted her head questioningly.
You are not gonna change?
Huh?
Change into your kimono.
She clarified while shaking her body as if mimicking the way the sleeves of a kimono waved. Hmm.
That's not what I wear on the regular.
She knew well that it wasn't actually the case that I always dressed in a kimono when at home.
Maybe, but you do still wear it.
I guess that's true.
Nagafuji's head continued to sway back and forth, almost as half part of her ritual to bring forth the kimono. As they did, her breasts. No, you don't need to hear that. It was quite strange for her to obsess so much over something. She just kept going, and eventually I found myself without a choice.
You want to see it?
I do. I do.
She cheered while slapping her hand together like a sea otter. Had I remained silent, she probably would have never stopped. As interesting as that might have been to see, I remember my brother specifically telling us to be quiet.
That's such a pain.
I complained. I wasn't kidding. It really was a hassle. Still, despite my objection, I did ultimately end up asking a maid who's been passing by to prepare me a kimono. She offered me to help put it on, but as I could do that fine by myself, I declined. I had a feeling that she and Nagafuji might get really into gossiping about me given the opportunity, and I wanted to avoid that if at all possible. How was I at home? How was I at school? Stuff like that. I really wasn't a fan. I began to undress. As I took my skirt off, I looked around and saw Nagafuji still lying on the floor.
What?
She asked. The look in her eyes was soft, giving the impression that she wasn't sure why I was leering at her.
Nothing. Just couldn't help but notice that you're staring at my butt.
Well, what can you do?
Are you just saying stuff at random now?
No, I mean, you are the only thing for me to look at.
Huh? Right. I guess you have a point.
Given the person I was dealing with, I found it difficult to dig out the true meaning behind her words. Had she meant that I was the only thing for her to look at in this room? Or was her statement to be taken in a more general sense, as in, was always the case? Somehow, I had a strong suspicion that both of those answers were valid. I still could have done without her staring at my butt, though. I kinda wanted to ask her what sorts of thought went through her head as she stared at it, or something. Maybe. I'd just gotten the under kimono on and was about to move to the main one when Nagafuji spoke to me.
You are pretty good at that.
Comes with practice.
It is like watching a cashier at department store wrap your gifts.
Was I supposed to take that as a compliment? I wasn't quite sure. Like I said before, trying to make sense of her really was a challenge. I could feel Nagafuji's eye on me the entire time I was changing. Was watching another person change their clothes really that fun to her? Was it fun? Though I did grow a bit flustered while tying the sash, I managed to get it on regardless, and soon enough I was done.
There. Satisfied?
I asked Nagafuji while waving the sleeves around in front of her face. She attempted to grab them, but failed. Seeing how she was still lying on the floor all lazily, I decided to test and see if I could use the sleeves to make her chase after them. Wouldn't you know it, that was exactly what happened. She practically leapt up. It was kind of fun, so I kept going. Until abruptly, Nagafuji's hand landed on my shoulders. I wasn't even able to make a sound before she already circled in front of me and pressed her lips against my forehead. For a second, it felt like the world before me was about to disappear, but I quickly recovered.
What are you?
Though her surprise attack might have caught me off guard, I wasn't all that flustered by it. My forehead remained cool, her hand was still on my shoulder. Nagafuji opened her mouth and spoke calmly.
You are cute, Hino.
Where the heck did that come from?
That one, on the other hand, that got me good. Her plain words of praise had more than enough weight to them to sweep me aside.
That is what I thought while I was looking at you.
She continued, still staring me in the eyes. She hadn't always been this much taller than me, but the way her shadow loomed over me at the moment, it really went to show the current difference between our heights.
You.
I didn't know what to say. Instead, I was simply left to avert my eyes, which prompted Nagafuji to step away with no apparent reluctance. She was just as fast moving away as she had been moving in, which made trying to keep it in tune with her nearly impossible. Well, whatever. It wasn't like I needed to do that. I just stayed like I was, and As long as she was there with me, I'd be just fine. That was that what was I thought. Speaking of Nagafuji, she was currently rocking her body from left to right. I gave her a questioning look.
Hmm. Should I change clothes too?
Come again? Change your clothes?
Yep. I am planning to spend the night here in this house.
What?
Wait, what? No forewarning? No anything? Did she even remember that I lived here? While I was busy processing her surprise announcement, Nagafuji picked up her bag off the desk.
Your house is so big that one extra person probably should not hurt anyone. Yes. Yes.
I wasn't sure why, but she sounded like she'd just won an argument. She then went on to open the bag, revealing a change of clothes alongside a set of toiletries. It now made sense why her bag today had been larger than the one she usually used. Still, that was no reason not to tell me.
You really need to let me know about this stuff beforehand.
If I have done that, you would have said no.
You know me well, huh?
I guess you really did learn how to communicate telepathically once you spent enough years with someone.
Right?
Nagafuji said before putting her glass back on. A certain realization hit me as I watched her nudge them up, all proud of herself. I was a fool for ever having been against it.